I'm Shirley, 28 female. I live in a quiet city, in a second-floor apartment that gets just enough morning sun to keep my plants alive. By day, I'm a cybersecurity analyst, which means I spend my time hunting for digital ghosts and closing backdoors that corporations accidentally leave open. My life has always been about order, logic, and predictable systems. But that all changed when the one system I was supposed to trust most, my own father, used his power not to protect, but to control and destroy. This is the story of how I used my knowledge of the very systems he abused to hold him accountable for a betrayal that went far beyond just a broken heart. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. For the first 6 months, my relationship with Mark felt like a breath of fresh air. After a string of unfulfilling dates with guys who either couldn't hold a conversation or seemed to think ambition was a dirty word, Mark was different. He was an architect, and he saw the world in lines, structures, and possibilities. He could talk for hours about the history of a building, the importance of natural light, or his dream of designing sustainable community housing. He was passionate, kind, and had a laugh that could make my entire apartment feel warmer. We met through our mutual friend David, who had vouched for him as one of the good ones, and David was right. Our dates were simple but perfect: long walks in the park, exploring little-known museums, and cooking elaborate meals together in my tiny kitchen. He never made me feel like my career was intimidating. In fact, he was fascinated by it. He called me his digital detective, and I loved that he saw the puzzle-solving aspect of my job rather than just the complex code. The only shadow in this otherwise sunny picture was my father, Frank. My dad has been a cop for over 30 years. He worked his way up from a patrolman to a lieutenant, and his identity was completely fused with his badge. To him, the world was a simple place, divided into good guys and bad guys, and he was firmly on the side of the good. This black and white worldview extended to his personal life, especially his perception of me. I was his only child, and his protectiveness often felt less like love and more like ownership. He saw threats everywhere, and any man I dated was immediately a suspect who had to be interrogated and vetted. He'd grill them over dinner, asking pointed questions about their finances, their family history, and their 5-year plan. Most men were scared off within a month. I'd grown used to it, a resigned frustration that had become a permanent fixture in my life. When I first told my dad about Mark, he grunted into the phone. "Architect, huh? What's his last name? Where's he from?" The interrogation had already begun. I tried to keep them apart for as long as possible, wanting to give Mark and me a chance to build a foundation before my father tried to bulldoze it. But the inevitable Sunday dinner finally arrived. I'd prepped Mark as best I could. "Just be yourself," I told him, "but maybe don't mention your college trip to Amsterdam." Mark, ever the optimist, just squeezed my hand. "It'll be fine, Shirley. He's your dad. He just wants to know you're safe." I appreciated his sentiment, but he didn't understand. My father wasn't just looking for safety, he was looking for control. The dinner was as tense as I'd expected. My father, in his off-duty polo shirt that still somehow looked like a uniform, sat at the head of the table, sizing Mark up. He asked about Mark's firm, his salary, his parents' professions, and whether he had any significant debts. Mark answered every question calmly and honestly, with a politeness my father didn't deserve. He even managed to steer the conversation toward a new city library project he was working on, a topic that was genuinely interesting. For a moment, I thought we might actually get through the evening unscathed. My mom, a master of navigating my father's moods, did her best to keep the peace, asking Mark about his hobbies and complimenting my cooking. But my father couldn't let it go. "So Mark," he said, leaning forward, "you drive that little blue import, right? A 21 model?" Mark looked surprised. Yeah, a Mazda. How did you know?" My dad gave a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I notice things. It's my job." A chill went down my spine. I had driven to dinner, so my dad hadn't seen Mark's car in the driveway. He must have seen it parked outside my apartment building on one of his unannounced drive-bys. It was his classic intimidation tactic, letting the person know they were being watched. I saw a flicker of unease in Mark's eyes, but he quickly covered it. Right. Well, it's a good car. Reliable. The rest of the dinner was strained. My father remained cold and distant, occasionally dropping little comments that were just on the edge of being threats. It's a tough world out there, he said at one point, staring directly at Mark. A person has to be careful, has to know who they're dealing with. On the drive back to my place, Mark was quiet. Your dad is intense, he finally said. I'm so sorry, Mark, I replied, my voice tight with anger and embarrassment. He's always like this. It's his way of trying to protect me, but it just comes out as interrogation and intimidation. Mark reached over and took my hand. Hey, it's okay, I'm not going anywhere. He'll warm up to me. I wanted to believe him, I really did. In the weeks that followed, things seemed to settle. My dad didn't bring Mark up again, and I took his silence as a grudging acceptance. Mark and I fell deeper into our comfortable, happy routine. We started talking about the future, about maybe moving in together next year, about trips we wanted to take. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to believe that I'd found something real and lasting, something that even my father's suffocating presence couldn't ruin. The illusion of normalcy was so perfect, so complete, that I never saw the storm that was gathering just over the horizon. I was happy, and in my family, happiness was always a fragile, temporary state. The breakup was so sudden it felt like a physical blow. One Tuesday night, we were making plans for a weekend trip to the coast. By Wednesday afternoon, it was over. Mark called me from his office, his voice strained and distant. Surely, I don't think this is going to work, he said, the words sounding hollow and rehearsed. I was stunned. What? What are you talking about? We were just looking at hotels yesterday. I could hear the sounds of his office in the background, the soft clicking of keyboards, a distant phone ringing. I know, he said, and his voice cracked slightly. I've been doing a lot of thinking and I don't see a future for us, I'm sorry. It was the most generic, soulless breakup speech I had ever heard. It wasn't him. There was no emotion, no real explanation, just a cold, clean cut. I pressed him for a reason, my confusion quickly turning to hurt. Thinking about what, Mark? Did I do something? Say something? Just tell me what's wrong. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, so long that I thought he had hung up. It's not you, he finally whispered, and his voice was so low I could barely hear him. It's for the best. Please don't call me again. And then he was gone. The line went dead, leaving me in a state of shocked silence, my phone still pressed to my ear. I called back immediately, but it went straight to voicemail. I tried again. Voicemail. I sent him a flurry of texts, begging for an explanation, for a chance to talk in person. No reply. It was like he had vanished, erased himself from my life in the span of a single phone call. The days that followed were a blur of misery and confusion. I went through the motions of work, staring blankly at lines of code, my mind replaying our last conversation over and over. I confided in my best friend David, who was just as baffled as I was. It makes no sense, Shirley, he said over coffee. The guy was head over heels for you. People don't just change their minds like that overnight. Something else has to be going on. I agreed, but I had no idea what it could be. I tortured myself with possibilities. Had he met someone else? Was he secretly in debt? Was he hiding some terrible secret? Every theory I came up with felt flimsy and wrong. The Mark I knew wouldn't have ended things so cruelly, so cowardly. He would have faced me. He would have given me a reason. 2 weeks passed. 2 weeks of silence, of checking my phone obsessively, of feeling a pit in my stomach every time I thought of him. I had finally started to accept in a numb sort of way that I would never get an explanation. I was beginning to transition from heartbroken to angry. And then, late on a Thursday night, my phone buzzed with a call from a blocked number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. Hello, I said, my voice cautious. Shirley, a voice whispered. It was Mark. He sounded completely different. All the confidence was gone, replaced by a raw, shaky fear. Mark, where have you been? What is going on? I demanded, all my pent-up frustration and hurt boiling over. I can't talk for long, he said, his words rushed. I'm so sorry, Shirley, for everything, for how I ended it. Then tell me why, I pleaded. I deserve to know why. He took a deep, shuddering breath. "It was your father," he said, and the world seemed to tilt on its axis. "What about my father?" I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. "He came to see me, Shirley, at my apartment, last Wednesday morning before I called you." He described the scene in short, fractured sentences. My father had shown up at his door, not in uniform, but still radiating an unmistakable aura of authority. He hadn't raised his voice. He didn't have to. "He was very calm," Mark said, his voice trembling at the memory. "He told me that he knew things about me. He mentioned my brother's juvenile record, something that was sealed years ago. He mentioned that my parents had some tax trouble a decade back, things he had no business knowing." My blood ran cold. My father had dug into Mark's life, into his family's life, looking for leverage. "And then," Mark continued, his voice dropping even lower, "he showed me his phone. He had a picture of my car's license plate. He said he'd run it through the system. He said he found an old speeding ticket I got in college that I'd forgotten to pay. A bench warrant was issued, but it was in another state and just fell through the cracks. It was nothing, really, but he made it sound like I was a fugitive. He told me that a simple clerical error could turn that forgotten ticket into a major problem for me. It could affect my professional license as an architect. He said it would be a shame if I got tangled up in the system over something so trivial." The threat wasn't spoken, but it hung in the air between them, thick and suffocating. My father had used his access to police databases to find a pressure point, and he had squeezed with all his might. "He told me I wasn't right for you," Mark choked out. "He said I needed to end it for my own good. He said if I ever contacted you again, he would make sure that clerical error found its way to the top of the right person's desk." I was scared, surely. I've never had a cop threaten me before. I didn't know what to do. I sank onto my couch, the phone feeling like a block of ice in my hand. It all clicked into place. The sudden breakup, the cold script, the terrified silence. It wasn't Mark who had broken my heart, it was my father. He had weaponized his badge not to protect me, but to control my life, to shatter my happiness because Mark didn't meet his impossible standards. The love and respect I had for my father, already strained and complicated, curdled into something dark and cold. The man who was supposed to be my protector had become my oppressor. As Mark finished his story, apologizing over and over, a new feeling began to replace my shock and grief. A quiet, burning rage. My father had abused his power. He had intimidated an innocent man and destroyed my relationship. And he had done it all using official police resources. A wave of clarity washed over me. My father, the police lieutenant, the man who preached about law and order, had just broken the law himself. And he had made one critical mistake. He had told Mark exactly what he'd done. He'd confessed to running his license plate through the police database, an action that, as I knew from my work in cybersecurity, always leaves a trace. A permanent, traceable, digital log. After the call with Mark ended, I sat in the dark for what felt like hours. The silence in my apartment was deafening, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the frantic beating of my own heart. The pieces of the puzzle were all there, sharp and painful. My father's initial dislike of Mark, his thinly veiled threats at dinner, and now this, a direct and illegal act of intimidation. The man who had taught me to ride a bike, who had lectured me about honesty and integrity my entire life, was a hypocrite and a bully. He hadn't just crossed a line, he had obliterated it, using the authority of his badge as a weapon against his own daughter's happiness. The grief for my lost relationship was still there, a dull ache in my chest, but it was being rapidly overshadowed by a cold, precise anger. This wasn't just a family dispute anymore. This was a criminal act. My mind, trained to see patterns and vulnerabilities in complex systems, immediately started analyzing the situation. In my line of work, I deal with digital footprints every day. I know that every keystroke, every query, every access to a secure database is logged. It has to be for accountability. Law enforcement databases are among the most heavily audited systems in existence for this very reason, to prevent abuse of power. Officers can't just look up their daughter's boyfriend for fun. Access is restricted to legitimate law enforcement purposes. Any query must be tied to an official case number or a valid investigation. Using it for personal reasons is a serious violation of department policy, privacy laws, and, in many jurisdictions, the law itself. It can be a career-ending offense. My father, for all his years on the force, had gotten arrogant. He probably thought that because he was a lieutenant, no one would ever question him. He likely assumed that a civilian like Mark would be too scared to ever say anything, and that I would just accept the breakup, heartbroken but none the wiser. He underestimated both of us, but most of all, he underestimated aided me and the skills he had ironically paid for through my college education. He had no idea that his daughter, who he still saw as a little girl in need of his protection, spent her days navigating the very kind of digital infrastructure he had just abused. The next morning, I called David. I met him at a small cafe far from my neighborhood, choosing a corner booth where we wouldn't be overheard. I told him everything Mark had said, my voice low and steady, betraying none of the emotional turmoil I felt inside. David listened intently, his expression shifting from sympathy to shock and finally to a quiet fury on my behalf. As an IT auditor, he understood the gravity of the situation instantly. "He admitted it?" David asked, his eyes wide. "He told Mark he ran his plate. That's unbelievably arrogant." "He was trying to scare him," I said, stirring my untouched coffee. "He wanted Mark to know that he had official power, that he could dig up dirt on anyone. He used the fact that he'd run the plate as part of the threat." David shook his head in disbelief. "Then there's a record, surely. A time-stamped, user-identified, non-repudiable log of the query. He can't deny it. The system will show his user ID, the exact time he accessed the database, and the license plate number he searched for. All they have to do is check if that query was attached to a legitimate case file. When it's not, he's caught." We started to map it out on a napkin. The path to proving this was clear, but it was fraught with danger. Going after a police lieutenant, my own father, was a monumental step. It would ignite a firestorm in my family. My mother would be devastated. My extended family, who all saw my father as a pillar of the community, would be horrified. I would be accused of betrayal, of trying to ruin my own father's life. But what was the alternative? Let him get away with it. Let him continue to believe he was above the law, free to manipulate and control my life and the lives of anyone I cared about. The thought made me feel sick. This wasn't just about Mark anymore. It was about me, about my autonomy, and about the principle that no one, not even a man with a badge, is above the rules. "So what's the plan?" David asked gently, seeing the conflict on my face. "How do you even start to get that information?" "I can't get it myself," I explained. "That would be illegal, but I can file an official complaint with the department's Internal Affairs Division, or even better, with an external oversight body, like the state's Police Standards and Training Commission. An external complaint is less likely to be buried." My brain was already in work mode, breaking the problem down into logical steps. Step 1 was to gather evidence. I needed a formal statement from Mark. His testimony was the foundation of the entire case. Without him, it was just my word against a respected lieutenant. Step 2 was to formalize the complaint, making it as detailed and irrefutable as possible. Step 3 was to submit it through the proper channels and brace for the fallout. "Are you sure you want to do this?" David asked, his voice full of concern. "This is going to blow up your whole world, surely." I looked out the window at the people passing by, each living their own life, oblivious to the war I was about to declare on my own family. For a fleeting moment, I hesitated. I thought about the good memories, the times my dad had been there for me, the pride I used to feel when I told people my father was a police officer. But then I pictured Mark's terrified voice on the phone. I imagined the next man I might fall in love with, and the one after that, all being subjected to the same illegal scrutiny and intimidation. I thought about the power my father held and the casual, entitled way he had abused it. The hesitation vanished. "I'm sure," I said, my voice firm. "He did this. He needs to be held accountable. He's a bully who hides behind a badge, and if I don't stop him, he'll never learn." David nodded slowly, a look of respect in his eyes. "Okay," he said, "then let's figure out how to build an airtight case." The decision was made. The line had been crossed, and there was no going back. My father had started this war, but I was going to be the one to finish it. The first and most critical step was getting Mark on board. I knew he was terrified, and asking him to file a formal complaint against a police lieutenant was a huge ask. It would mean putting his name on an official document, potentially testifying, and making himself a target. I called him from a new prepaid burner phone, using the same blocked number setting he had used. When he answered, he sounded wary. "Shirley, I told you I can't talk to you." "I know, Mark, and I'm sorry to put you in this position," I said, speaking quickly and calmly. "But what my father did is illegal. It's a serious abuse of power, and I'm going to report him. To do that, I need your help. I need your official statement." There was a long silence on the other end. I could hear his shallow breathing. "Report him? Surely, he's a cop, he's your dad, they'll protect him. All it will do is make things worse for me." His fear was palpable, and I couldn't blame him. "No, they won't," I insisted, trying to project a confidence I didn't fully feel. "Mark, I work with these kinds of systems. When he ran your plate for personal reasons, he created a digital record that he can't erase or explain away. It's irrefutable proof. But the investigation can't start without a formal complaint from the victim. That's you. I just need you to write down exactly what happened, when he came to your apartment, what he said, the specific threats he made about your old ticket and your professional license. Just the facts. I'll handle the rest. I promise I will protect you." I explained the process, how we would file it with a state-level oversight board, not just his local department, to ensure impartiality. I told him he could have a lawyer review his statement and that I would cover the cost. I laid out the logic, the digital trail, the inevitability of the evidence. I wasn't just appealing to his sense of justice. I was showing him a clear, logical path to a resolution where he would be protected. I could hear the gears turning in his head. He was an architect, a man who understood structure and process. "So the record is definitely there?" he asked, a hint of his old self returning to his voice. 100%, I confirmed. It's the digital equivalent of a signed confession. He was quiet for another minute. "Okay," he finally said, his voice stronger now. "Okay, Shirley, I'll do it. Send me the details of what you need." A wave of relief washed over me. The foundation of my case was secure. While Mark worked on his statement, I began my own investigation. I couldn't hack into the police database, of course, but I could use my skills in open-source intelligence to build a comprehensive timeline and gather supporting evidence. My goal was to create a file so thorough, so detailed, that internal affairs couldn't ignore it. I started with the date my father confronted Mark. Using my knowledge of data logs, I knew the query on Mark's plate would have been made shortly before that confrontation. I documented the day of our disastrous family dinner, noting my father's specific comment about Mark's car, which proved he was already paying undue attention to him. I created a timeline of our relationship, showing that everything was normal and positive until the exact day after my father's visit to Mark. Next, I needed to understand the specific regulations my father had violated. I spent a weekend digging through the state legislature's website, the state police's official manual of conduct, and the policies of his specific department. I found the exact statutes and departmental codes regarding the acceptable use of the Criminal Justice Information Services (CJIS) database. The rules were crystal clear. Access was for official business only. Unauthorized access for personal use was explicitly forbidden and listed as grounds for immediate disciplinary action, up to and including termination and criminal charges. I copied and pasted the exact codes into my document, highlighting the relevant sections. My complaint wouldn't just be an emotional appeal. It would be a legal and procedural argument. David was my sounding board through it all. He reviewed my timeline and my research, offering a fresh perspective. "You need to show motive," he advised one evening as we reviewed the documents at his apartment. "You've established the what and the how, but you need to solidify the why. Why would a decorated lieutenant risk his career to break up his daughter's relationship?" I knew the answer. It was about control. So I added a section detailing my father's history of intimidating my previous boyfriends. I couldn't prove he'd used the police database on them, but I could establish a clear, long-standing pattern of behavior. I wrote about the interrogations, the veiled threats, the way he treated every man I dated as a potential criminal. This context would paint a picture of a man with a history of abusing his authority in his personal life, making the specific accusation against him all the more credible. A week later, Mark sent me his statement. It was perfect. Written with the precision of an architect drawing up blueprints, it was a simple, factual, and damning account of what had happened. He detailed the date and approximate time of my father's visit. He quoted my father's words as accurately as he could remember them, including the specific mention of running his license plate and the threat regarding his old traffic warrant. He described his fear and explained that he broke up with me under duress. He had his lawyer review it, who added a sentence stating that Mark was willing to testify under oath. It was the smoking G. I compiled everything into a single, comprehensive file. It included Mark's notarized statement, my own statement establishing the pattern of behavior, the detailed timeline of events, and a list of the specific departmental and state regulations that had been violated. Looking at the completed file on my laptop screen, I felt a strange mix of pride and sorrow. I had built a perfect, unshakable case. I had followed the digital footprints right back to my father. There was no ambiguity, no room for doubt. But this collection of data, this logical and methodical assembly of proof, was also a declaration of war against my own family. It was the weapon that would likely end my father's career and irrevocably shatter my relationship with him and my mother. The illusion of normalcy was gone forever, replaced by the harsh, unblinking reality of the digital trail he had left behind. With the evidence compiled, the next phase was about strategy. I couldn't just email the file to the police department's general inbox and hope for the best. A complaint of this magnitude against a high-ranking officer could easily get lost or buried in bureaucracy, especially if my father's friends in the department caught wind of it. I needed to ensure it landed on the right desk and that there was an external record of its submission, creating a paper trail that couldn't be erased. David, with his auditing background, was instrumental here. "You need redundancy and oversight," he said, sketching out a flowchart on a whiteboard in his living room. "Don't just file it with one agency. File it with multiple, and make sure each one knows you've filed with the others. It creates a system of checks and balances. No single agency will want to be the one caught sweeping it under the rug if they know others are watching." We identified 3 key targets. First, his department's internal affairs, IA division. We had to file it with them as a matter of procedure. Second, the state's Commission on Peace Officer Standards and Training Post. This independent body was responsible for licensing and certifying all police officers in the state. They had the power to revoke an officer's certification, effectively ending their career in law enforcement permanently. They took abuse of power complaints very seriously. Third, we decided to send a copy to the mayor's office and the city's civilian oversight board. These were political bodies, but their awareness would add another layer of pressure on the police department to conduct a thorough and transparent investigation. Next, we focused on the delivery method. Email was too easy to ignore or claim was never received. We decided to send the entire package via certified mail to the heads of each agency, requiring a signature upon delivery. This would provide us with a legal receipt proving they had received the complaint. I also drafted a cover letter, professionally and dispassionately worded, summarizing the contents of the package. In the letter, I explicitly stated that the same complaint had been filed simultaneously with the other listed agencies. This was David's masterstroke. It was a polite but firm way of saying, "I'm watching, and so are they. Do your job." Before I sent anything, I had to do the hardest thing of all, talk to my mom. I couldn't blindside her. She deserved to hear it from me first. I invited her out for coffee, and she was immediately suspicious. "Everything okay, Shirley? You sound so serious." I took a deep breath and laid it all out for her. I told her about Mark, the breakup, the phone call, and what Dad had done. I watched her face crumble as the story unfolded. At first, she was in denial. "Oh, honey, there must be a misunderstanding. Your father, he wouldn't do that. He was just trying to look out for you." Mom, he threatened Mark. He illegally used police resources to dig up dirt on him and his family. He admitted it. This isn't looking out for me. This is a crime. I explained the evidence I had, the digital log, Mark's statement. I told her I was filing a formal complaint. That's when the tears started. "Shirley, please," she begged, her voice cracking. "Don't do this, you'll ruin him. He's dedicated his whole life to the force. This will destroy his career, his pension. He's your father?" Her pleas were like daggers, each one hitting a raw nerve of guilt and obligation. "What he did was wrong, Mom. He broke the law he swore to uphold. What am I supposed to do?" "Just let it go. Let him get away with it so he can do it to the next person I date. We can talk to him," she pleaded. "We can sort this out as a family." "It's past that now," I said softly but firmly. "This isn't a family issue anymore. This is about an abuse of public trust. I'm sorry, Mom, I have to do this." She left the coffee shop in tears, leaving me feeling like the villain in my own story. The conversation was devastating, but it solidified my resolve. Her reaction, to protect him at all costs, to prioritize his reputation over his illegal actions, was part of the problem. It was the very culture of silence that allowed people like my father to act with impunity. The next day, I went to the post office with 4 large, carefully prepared envelopes. My hands were shaking slightly as I handed them to the clerk. As she processed the certified mail slips, I felt a sense of finality. The case was built. The missiles were launched. There was no calling them back. I walked out of the post office into the bright afternoon sun and felt a profound sense of emptiness. There was no triumph, no satisfaction. Just the cold, heavy knowledge that I had just detonated a bomb in the middle of my own life. The following week was silent and agonizing. I didn't hear from my mother or father. I went to work, came home, and tried not to think about the storm that was about to break. Then, on a Friday afternoon, I got a call from an official-sounding woman who identified herself as a senior investigator with the State Post Commission. "Ms. Miller," she said, her voice all business, "we have received your complaint regarding Lieutenant Frank Miller. I'm calling to inform you that we have opened a formal investigation based on the information you provided. We have also been in contact with his department's internal affairs, who have concurrently opened their own investigation. We will be subpoenaing the database access logs for the dates in question. You and Mr. Thompson will be contacted for official interviews in the coming weeks." It was happening. The gears of the system were beginning to turn, slowly but surely. The perfect case I had built was now in the hands of the people who could use it to deliver justice. My father's digital footprints were about to be unmasked, and his day of reckoning was finally at hand. The call from the Post investigator set off a chain reaction. Within days, the carefully constructed walls of my family life came crashing down. The first sign was a series of furious voicemails from my father. He didn't get me on the phone, I wasn't answering his calls, but he left messages that started with feigned confusion. "Shirley, I got a strange call from work. I think you need to clear up some misunderstanding." And quickly escalated to rage. "What have you done? Are you trying to destroy me, after everything I've done for you?" Hearing his voice, stripped of its usual calm authority and filled with panicked anger, was unsettling. It was the sound of a man who was used to being in complete control, suddenly realizing he had lost it. He never once, in any of his messages, denied what he had done. He only expressed outrage that I had dared to hold him accountable. My mother, caught in the middle, became his unwilling messenger. She would call me, crying, begging me to retract the complaint. "Your father is a wreck, Shirley. They've put him on administrative leave. They took his service weapon. He just sits in his chair and stares at the wall. You don't understand what this is doing to him." "I understand perfectly, Mom," I would reply, my voice flat and tired from repeating the same arguments. "These are the consequences of his actions. He did this to himself." Our conversations became circular and painful, and eventually they stopped altogether. The silence from my parents was a heavy, suffocating blanket. A few weeks later, I was called in for a formal interview with the IA investigators, 2 grim-faced detectives in a sterile, windowless room at the police headquarters. It was an intimidating environment, designed to make people uncomfortable, but I refused to be rattled. I walked them through my statement calmly and methodically, presenting the timeline and the pattern of my father's behavior. They were professional but skeptical, their questions probing for any inconsistency in my story. The turning point came when I explained my professional background. I'm a cybersecurity analyst, I said. I understand how database logs work. I know that the evidence of his unauthorized query exists and that it's irrefutable. I saw a flicker of understanding in one of the detectives' eyes. They weren't dealing with a hysterical, scorned daughter. They were dealing with someone who understood their systems better than they probably did. Mark's interview followed a few days later. He told me they treated him with respect, listening carefully to his account. The fact that he was a credible, professional man with no criminal record and a clear, consistent story gave his testimony immense weight. The investigators had the what, the why, and the who. All they needed now was the final digital proof. And according to the Post investigator who kept me updated, that proof was damning. They had pulled the logs. On the morning before Mark broke up with me, my father's user ID had been used to run a query on Mark's license plate. The query was not attached to any case number or official investigation. It was a ghost search, a clear violation of policy. The digital footprint was exactly where I said it would be. The investigation dragged on for 2 months. It felt like a lifetime. The family I had known was gone, replaced by a silent, bitter estrangement. David was my rock through it all, checking in on me, making sure I was eating, and reminding me why I was doing this. "You're holding a powerful man accountable, Shirley," he said one night. "That's not betrayal. That's courage." The end came not with a dramatic courtroom showdown, but with a quiet, final phone call. It was my mother. Her voice was hollow, devoid of any emotion. "He's coming to see you," she said. "He wants to talk." An hour later, my father was at my door. I hadn't seen him in months, and he looked like a different man. He was thinner, his face was pale and drawn, and the confident, commanding presence he always carried was gone. He was just an old man in a wrinkled shirt. I let him in, and he stood awkwardly in the middle of my living room. He wouldn't look at me. "They gave me a choice," he said, his voice raspy. "I could face a termination hearing and likely criminal charges for misuse of state resources, or I could retire, effective immediately. I lose part of my pension." He finally lifted his head, and his eyes were filled not with anger, but with a deep, weary bitterness. "I chose to retire." He reached into his jacket and pulled out his wallet. He flipped it open and removed his badge, the gold-plated lieutenant's shield he had polished with pride for years. He placed it on my coffee table. The metallic clink echoed in the silent room. It was a gesture of surrender, a symbol of everything he had lost. "Are you happy now?" he asked, his voice cracking. "You did it. You took everything from me." I looked at the badge on the table, then back at him. The anger I had held onto for so long had evaporated, leaving only a profound sadness. "I didn't take anything from you, Dad," I said, my voice quiet but steady. "You gave it away. You gave it away the moment you decided your need for control was more important than my happiness. You gave it away when you broke the same laws you swore to uphold. This isn't my fault. This is the consequence of your choices." He had no response. There was nothing left to say. He stood there for a moment longer, a stranger in his daughter's apartment, then turned and walked out the door, leaving his badge behind on my table. After my father left, I stared at the badge on my coffee table for a long time. It was heavier than I imagined, both physically and metaphorically. It represented 30 years of service, a source of immense pride for my family, and the very symbol of the power he had abused. It felt like the final, tangible piece of a life that had been completely dismantled. My father was gone from my apartment, and in many ways, gone from my life. His career was over. His reputation was shattered. The outcome I had methodically planned for had come to pass, but there was no sense of victory. There was only a quiet, hollow ache. I had won, but I had lost a father in the process. The weeks that followed were about finding a new kind of normal. My mother eventually started speaking to me again, though our conversations were strained and tiptoed around the massive, unspoken subject of my father. She told me they were selling the house and planning to move to a smaller town a few states away, a place where no one knew them. "He can't stand the thought of running into his old colleagues at the grocery store," she said, her voice filled with a weary resignation. I knew it was for the best for all of us. The bridges had been burned too thoroughly to rebuild. I sent them a simple, heartfelt letter telling them that despite everything, I hoped they would find peace. I never got a reply. The news of a lieutenant being forced into early retirement after an IA investigation spread quietly through the city's grapevine. No details were made public, but whispers and rumors did the job. For me, the most important part was that the system, for once, had worked. A powerful man had been held accountable because the digital evidence was undeniable. It was a small victory for transparency and a testament to the fact that no one is truly above the systems they operate within. One of the most unexpected consequences was a call I received from Mark. He had heard through the legal channels that the investigation was closed. "I just wanted to call and say thank you," he said, his voice clear and confident, all traces of fear gone. "You didn't have to do any of that, Shirley. You could have just let it go, but you stood up for what was right. I'll never forget that." We met for coffee a few days later. It wasn't awkward or romantic. It felt like two old friends catching up. The damage my father had done was too deep to repair what we had, but the anger and hurt had faded, replaced by a mutual respect. He was thriving. At his firm, leading a new, exciting project. Seeing him happy and free from the fear my father had instilled in him was a crucial part of my own healing. It was proof that I had done the right thing. "You're one of the strongest people I know," he said as we parted ways. His words meant more to me than he could ever know. Life slowly settled into a new rhythm. My work, which had once been just a job, now felt deeply personal and meaningful. I understood on a visceral level the importance of accountability, of digital trails, of ensuring that systems were used ethically and responsibly. I found a new sense of purpose in what I did, a quiet pride in being a guardian of the digital world's integrity. David remained my constant support, the one person who had been with me through every step of the ordeal. Our friendship deepened, forged in the fire of this shared crisis. One evening, months later, I was cleaning out a drawer and came across the badge. I had tucked it away, unsure of what to do with it. Holding it now, it no longer felt heavy with the weight of betrayal. It was just a piece of metal, a relic from a past life. I drove down to the waterfront and walked out onto a long pier. Under the vast, quiet sky, I thought about my father. I mourned the man he should have been, the father I wished I'd had. But I also accepted the reality of who he was. I had stood up to his abuse of power, not out of revenge, but out of a desperate need to reclaim my own life and autonomy. I had chosen integrity over silence. I pulled my arm back and threw the badge as far as I could into the deep, dark water. I didn't watch it sink. I turned and walked away, leaving the past behind me. The path ahead was uncertain, and my family was fractured beyond repair. But for the first time in my life, I felt truly, completely free. It was a new dawn, and it was all my own.